evening. I'm going to call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Rockford Public School Board of Education to order at 5:33. Please call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Mohammed?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford? With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, Kathy Bayer, thank you. She's working behind the scenes to produce the board's broadcast on Channel 20. I also want to welcome SSAC student representative Jay Gupta from Auburn High School. Thank you for joining us. He'll spend tonight and the next 2 meetings with us and give us his perspective on what he thinks of being at board meetings, I guess, or how the district is run. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you for being here. I also want to remind everyone that we hold our questions until after each of the presentations. So first on the agenda are the meeting minutes from 1/4/22. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? If not, is there a consensus to approve? Come, I'll take. All right, thank you. Mr. Siegel, I'm going to give the floor to you for the internal external stakeholder committee report, or portion of the meeting. It's not just a report, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So tonight we are going to, in the internal external stakeholder committee, begin by celebrating our RPS 205 students. 3 students from Rockford Public Schools performed over the weekend at the Illinois Music Education Association, ILMEA, all-state event in Peoria from January 26th to the 29th. This prestigious event brings together the best performing arts students from across the state for both rehearsals and performances. Students must first be nominated to participate in the rigorous audition process in their ILMEA district and then be chosen to participate in the All-State Series. Congratulations to the following students, and if you are here, please stand and be recognized. Amy Van Roy from East High School. Yeah. Amy performed in the All-State Chorus. Thank you and well done. Bronson Campbell from Auburn High School. Bronson also performed in the All-State Chorus. And Josiah Wofford from Auburn High School. Josiah performed in the All-State Honors Chorus. The Illinois Music Education Association advocates for universal access to comprehensive music education, delivers exemplary professional development for educators, and provides outstanding musical experiences for all Illinois learners, facilitated by licensed music instructors. Congratulations to each of these students, their families and friends, teachers and principals for supporting them. Next, we want to recognize Auburn High School junior Juliana Gamero, who was named the 2022 City of Rockford Youth Poet Laureate. Is Juliana here? Ah, too bad. Being a word person, I love to be in the presence of other word people and celebrate them, so it would have been great had she been here. Juliana was named to the 1-year term in January in partnership with the Rockford Area Arts Council, the RAAC, Rockford Public Library, and City of Rockford. Juliana has always been surrounded by language, particularly Spanish and English. Growing up in a Mexican-Puerto Rican household deeply influenced her love of language. She has been published in the Young American Poetry Digest, earned an honorable mention with the National Scholastic Art and Writing Award, and she is currently working on her first novel. Did I mention she's a junior in high school? Man, this is impressive. From Rockford Mayor Tom McNamara, Juliana's plans for her 1-year term as Youth Poet Laureate are steeped with passion for poetry, community and the impact the arts can have, especially for young people. Congratulations to Juliana for this amazing honor, and to her family, friends, teachers, and principals who have supported her. Although she's not here, I think she's still deserving of a round of applause.
Hey, David, Mr. Siegel,
Yeah.
Could we have Amy? She made the trip here. I'm just so impressed because it's in these times, especially being in school and all. Can you step up to the podium and just introduce yourself and tell us what year you are and what your plans are? You have to push the button.
I'm Amy. Music is like a huge passion of mine, and I really plan on pursuing that when I go to college. My sophomore year, I made it to All-State, but I got sick, so I had to go home early. But it has been such an honor to be able to perform in the All-State choir this year, and yeah.
It was everything you'd hoped it'd be.
Yes, it was.
And you're a junior, so maybe we'll see you again next year?
No, I'm a senior.
You are a senior. I apologize.
It's okay. I'm graduating this year.
And your plan is to do what?
To pursue music. I really want to go to University of Illinois, but I'm not really sure like exactly what I'm going to do yet. So,
Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
We're thrilled to have had you as part of our school district and representing us at state. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And send our best to your classmates. We missed them.
And this week's top item on the 205 Vibe was the January COVID update. Last week's top item was the same. Use a little more variety, maybe? Yeah. It's a great topic, though, right? COVID. Coming very soon will be our RU Pathway podcast featuring students who have graduated from Rockford Public Schools and are finishing the program at Rockford University. A blog post that you won't want to miss, Celebrate RPS 205 Arts, highlighting our 6th annual Fine Arts Banquet, which will be held on April 6th. Also, be sure to read the nomination categories for those who excel awards program. This statewide program honors individuals who have made outstanding contributions to education. And before I move on to the legislative news, an idea has been floated, amongst the board about possibly seeing some of the some of the contributions that the students are making. I don't know if it'd perhaps be in video format or whatever, something that we could bring to the board. We will work on this in the internal, external stakeholders meetings and figure out a format that's going to work and be representative of what our students are doing and the talents that they're bringing. So thank you for the suggestion. Our next update is regarding legislative news, and I will turn it over to Dr. Jarrett, who will give us an update on HB 2778.
Yes, I will keep it brief. House Bill 2778 we've talked a great deal about, and there really was a wonderful and open response from our local legislators. However, there was not a great deal that could be done because Governor Pritzker negotiated directly with the IEA and the IFT, and essentially the bill was improved. We did, instead of all sick days automatically being returned, there was an improvement made that it was tied to COVID vaccination status, which essentially allows individuals to have an easier time to stay at work and avoid losing those sick days. So it has not been finalized, but there really did not end up being a lot of room for legislators to take action on this particular bill unless they chose to override the veto.
Thank you. And next, I want to turn your attention to the handout Bill Report Student Discipline. You should have a hard copy with you. It's also on board docs as the other item in the internal, external stakeholders section of the agenda. This list was assembled by our lobbyists in response to a request from the board for information regarding student discipline. These bills have either been passed or will be presented in the legislature in the near future. If you have any questions regarding the bills, please email Laura Fromm or Laura Lammer. We are looking forward to the legislative breakfast next Tuesday, February 8th at East High School from 8:15 to 10:15. Representatives West and Sosnowski have confirmed they will attend. Senator Stottleman is a tentative yes, and Representative Vella's Chief of Staff, Ricardo Montoya Picazo, will also be in attendance. Someone from our team will be located at the entrance to direct you to where we will be holding the breakfast. If you have not yet confirmed your attendance, please let Laura Fromm know this week. And if you have any particular questions or topics you would like to discuss with our legislators, please submit them to Laura Fromm and or Laura Lammer. We would like to be able to set a fairly clear agenda and list of topics for our representatives to discuss. It's kind of important that we get this in this week because we will want to have that submitted to them to post on Friday so that they have some time to be prepared. I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Jarrett again, who will give us a summary of the Downtown Leadership Club's discussion this past week.
I think I can potentially speak to all three of these topics, and then you can feel free to add in. Basically, the Downtown Leadership Club weekly principal meetings and the assistant principal meetings all tie into a larger theme, which is the district taking very seriously data we receive annually in our employee engagement survey. The leadership team decided this year's focus needed to continue to be ensuring that the district's actions and words matched up. And so we did some analysis of why that breaks down. And our focus this year has been on extending communication to go beyond written or kind of one-way communication to more what we're referring to as co-creation of messages, where we have a chance to have conversations about topics at least more frequently. So the Downtown Leadership Club, which makes up our district office leadership team housed here in the district headquarters, also with our principals, we're really trying to engage in much more intentional conversations to ensure that the relationships and the ideas translate more effectively that way. So this is something that takes more time, but we are encouraged by some preliminary results. And the weekly principal Zoom meetings are a way to facilitate that. Mr. Gallagher could speak in more detail. Assistant principal meetings are also utilized to ensure, for the first time this year, we are paying special attention to group mock interviews of our assistant principals to better connect their strengths, their weaknesses, their career pathways, and we have 22 assistant principals scheduled up for this voluntary opportunity. So kudos to Mr. Gallagher and the schools team for setting that up, as well as the weekly principal conversations via Zoom.
So just to be clear, you weren't actually doing Mr. Gallagher's presentation, so we will still hear from him?
Yes.
Okay, marvelous. All right. It was just very thorough, so I was like, wow, that's great.
It was. Thanks for doing so much of the legwork for me, Aaron.
Mr. Gallagher.
Well, no, effectively, in terms of the weekly principal Zoom meetings where we have afternoon check-ins on Wednesdays, the idea is that we are being more deliberate and intentional for how we cascade the why behind many of the decisions that are made at the central office level. What we've come to recognize is that we do a rather exceptional job, I would say, of communicating district-level initiatives in written format through sharing principal headlines each Monday and through educator news on Tuesdays, but that written format doesn't always do justice to the why behind the rationale for any initiatives that we are rolling out. And so by having the opportunity for these check-ins with principals and assistant principals on Wednesdays, it really allows for more of a dialogue to take place as principals principals and assistant principals have had that time to digest the content that is in that written format from Mondays and Tuesdays publications, and not only just have that dialogue, but as we move forward, really make sure that we're creating a space for the co-creation that Aaron alluded to, so that if we really want to make sure that everybody owns the why and understands the why, as that trickles down from, maybe central office to the school supervisors to the principals on down to their staff, the more opportunity there is for dialogue around these topics, the more opportunity for co-creation, the more that we're all able to be on the same page.
Thank you. I very much like the idea that we might better be connecting staff to to downtown. Seems like on the engagement surveys, we're always really recognizing that disconnect, and I'm hopeful that this is going to help with that. So thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Ms. Detman and Mr. Dotson, who will give us an update on ARP ESSER.
So we've made a lot of really positive movement in the last month and a half or so as it relates to the idea of a community call to action and using our ARP ESSER dollars to rally our community in alignment with our universal goals and our equity imperative. So what you see on the screen is a snip of a web page that's live. You can find it by going to rps205.com using the hamburger menu in the upper right-hand corner and going to About Us, Live, Learn, Play. This is the screen that you'll see, and it will walk community partners, agencies, service providers through the process of becoming a potential RPS partner funded through ARP ESSER. There are really three big things. Number one is to read the toolkit. The toolkit is a guide to all things community call to action related. It includes key terminology. So what do we mean when we say evidence-based? What do we mean when we say learning loss? What is a call to action? All of that. It gives timelines and details and logistics. After the toolkit, step number two is to take a look at what project proposals are out there. What are the calls to action that the district has put forward? A call to action is an opportunity for the district to really identify a problem and then invite innovative solutions from the community. So we are not beginning with the solution in mind, we're beginning with the problem. And the problem is informed by data, either what we're hearing and experiencing as we're working with schools, or what our quantitative data is showing us. And we're carving out specifically what's a problem that we're trying to solve for our kids right now that we need your help with. So right now we have 4 calls to action published. The first is around transportation. We're asking for the community's partnership and helping students get to school safely and consistently when they live within 1.5 miles of their school and we don't yet have a bus route provided. And I'll remind anyone listening and the board that we are actively working on providing those bus routes, but our bus driver shortage has made that really challenging this year. So we're asking the community for support and ideas. Secondly, we have a call to action around community organizations and extending time. This began as an idea specifically with community centers, and we expanded it to include lots of different organizations and agencies. Where can we, at the neighborhood level, provide safe time before school, after school, on the weekend, during holiday break, or over the summer, where they can extend their time to learn and then grow strong relationships with adults? The third call to action is wraparound supports for behavioral and SEL services. We began this already with a jump start with the Rosecrans contract, and thank you for the approval of that a couple of weeks ago. That is sort of our primary partner, but we have opened it up to other providers, other service providers to join in. And we had, I would say, about 6 to 8 organizations represented as initial prospective partners in the first Zoom call. And then our last call to action is around mentorship. And we're inviting all organizations, small and large, to put forward their ideas for mentoring students, meeting them where they are and helping them have solid adult figures in their lives to help them stay on track to meet their goals. And then today, I believe, we're also going to be, tomorrow, we're going to be launching our second wave of proposals. And on this one, we have a proposal around fine arts. What can we do to enrich and extend learning opportunities for students in the community focused around the arts? So that's what's live right now, and that step 2 is to review the proposals, review the calls to action, and start planning proposals. Then in step 3, the community agency, organization, business, whoever it is, would submit their proposal. And we've had one strong message out to all community partners, which is we want to say yes to as many proposals as we can. We don't want a heightened sense of competition. We really want people to be networking, collaborating, aligning their resources to put together strong proposals that will meet the needs of our students. Each proposal has one RPS team lead. That RPS team lead gathers a team of 5 around them. They use the rubric that is in the toolkit to vet the efficacy of the proposal. And then every 6 months as a board, you're going to be privy to the data around each of the contracts, each of the proposals that was accepted. We have progress monitoring in place. You'll be looking at the outcomes, the number of students served, and how close or far away they are from their goals. And that'll happen as a part of our BESSER 6-month updates. So this is what goes out to the public. Mr. Dotson will tell us a lot more about his outreach efforts, but this is available to everyone, and those are sort of the 3 main steps of the process. We would be looking for wave 1 proposals to come to you for board approval in April, so that work could begin at the end of April.
Thank you, Ms. Detman. Mr. Dotson.
Thank you. So obviously we're very excited about this unprecedented opportunity to collaborate with our community. And if the next slide there, Mr. Childers. So this is this list was compiled from the community listening session that I was able to collaborate with Tiffany Brunson on. And so my work at this kind of granular grassroots community organization is to kind of methodically go back and revisit and meet with these individuals and organizations who attended that session, and to create an opportunity and make them aware of the opportunities that Ms. Detman just outlined. And I will want to say, I think in your packet, one typo there, William Martin Providence Baptist Church, is correct on the screen, but it probably, I don't think it said that in your packet, so I just wanted to point that out. But we are, actually, I'm going through about half of the list and really having very intentional one-on-one conversations with these individuals just to make sure that they are aware of these opportunities and how to access these call to actions. I'm responsible for 2 of them. I have the transportation call to action and the mentorship call to action. Just to give you a quick example, and I apologize in advance that this wasn't in your packet as well, but I just received this graphic yesterday as to what this looked like. Is it in there, Mr.? So this is an example of real time of what this looks like in terms of how we're trying to engage our community. So tomorrow we're going to have a virtual kind of session, and we're collaborating with Wabongo Leadership Council, and I will be co-facilitating this along with Alderwoman Gabrielle Torina, Mr. Matthew Simpson, and myself, where we're going to use their network and context to invite, again, individuals and organizations to make them aware of this opportunity. So excited about this, and looking forward to more engagement and making our community aware of these opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to draw your attention to the next slide, which is the board calendar.
David, can we do questions on that, what they presented?
Oh, by all means, and you're certainly welcome to ask questions.
Okay. The 4 areas that you gave us, I didn't see them anywhere in here, but I must have missed it. Are they in my slide deck?
They are not on the slide deck, but they are on the Live, Learn, Play webpage. There's a place to click for each of those calls to action.
And you said it was fine arts focused?
The one that we'll be releasing tomorrow is a fine arts focus.
So this Our Best or update for community partnership updates that is in here right before that board calendar, was there a different focus for that group of people? I'm not understanding the different groups that were.
So there are 4 different calls to action. I'm sorry, there are 5 different calls to action.
What's the 5th?
Fine arts.
Okay, fine arts is considered one. Okay.
Yep, mentors.
Right, and the
Transportation,
wraparound.
community organizations and extended time, and then wraparound behavioral and SEL supports.
So will there be different groups for each of those? I mean, I look at something like this, I don't see anybody from Rockford Area Arts Council, for example. So you'll reach out to a different group of people for...
Yes. So the slide that Mr. Dotson showed was specifically from the community listening session. As we release each call to action, we hold an informational Zoom for prospective partners. And so we had 16 different organizations sign on for the community organizations and extended time. I think I had up to between 6 and 8 for behavioral and social emotional support. I'm not sure about transportation, a handful. And then with the mentors, that's the group that Earl's reaching out to. But beyond that, we also have emailed providers directly to share with them the call to action, point them to the webpage. We also created a Let's Talk. So we're getting the word out there as much as possible.
Okay, thanks. It would have been nice to have a slide with those to kind of go along with while you were talking.
Sure.
And because I'm not familiar with all the organizations, could you give a little background on Wabongo Leadership Group, please?
Yes, so the Wabongo Leadership Council is an organization, they've been in operation about 5 years now, and what they do is they partner with different organizations that center around youth engagement, and we've partnered with them before. I think we've done some things with them in the area of career and college readiness, but they have a broad array of contacts and networks that they work with, and so our collaboration is about again, inviting some of those organizations and individuals that they work with, provide the platform, and then kind of talk about, again, in more detail about what these call to actions mean, how do you process, what's the process like, and answer any questions that they may have.
And the YAVO, what is that organization, please?
So it's a musical organization. They do. So they do marching bands. They work with some of our kids around learning them, teach them music, instruments. So again, it's an organization that hasn't had an opportunity per se to partner with us and collaborate. So they were at the meeting and were very interested in collaborating with us.
Absolutely. Maybe the rest of my board members know who all these organizations are, but I just wasn't familiar. So
yeah, YAVO actually is an acronym. I believe it's Youth Against Violence Organization, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Ms. Muhammad. And the 100 Strong is who?
Again, it's another grassroots organization that works with our youth and engage with our youth in various projects.
And Renewal Turning.
So again, that's another group that they work with youth. They take them on different field trips. They also there's a group that also, they did the walking school bus for a while at Lewis Lemon and Ellis. And so again, they engage with a variety of community organizations, but primarily with our young people.
I think it bears note, just these groups that are coming forward to try to help the students and kids in the district. So thank you for the update on who they are and the answer to my other question. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, Ms. Detman, can you just give me some clarification, please, on the toolkit? Because I did glance at it on the website, and I saw the information that listed about the different cycles for the application and how the soonest services can begin are the end of April. And so there was a part that I was confused on. It mentioned that organizations will need to front the cost, like if they need supplies or anything like that. And my concern with that is, what if grassroots are struggling and they don't have those funds? Are we able to make an exception for when that happens?
Yes, we have heard that concern. We heard it repeatedly in each of our listening sessions. And so we were able to come together as a team between finance, legal, and grants, and do a rapid turnaround of payroll on a Wednesday to Wednesday cycle so that we could turn around payroll on a weekly basis for smaller organizations who need that tighter turnaround. And then things like supplies, those are things that we can order anytime. Payroll was really one of the biggest issues, and we believe we've been able to solve that.
And Ms. Muhammad, I think in our meeting, I think it's on the document now. I think we just added that.
I just added
that today, so
today.
It's in there now.
Okay, I'll check
the
that
new
out.
information. Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Were there any other questions we'd like to address?
Yeah, I had one more.
Yes, Ms. Muhammad.
So actually, this is kind of for going back a little bit. Mr. Gallagher, you had mentioned when you were talking about the assistant principals and the principal meetings, how the goal is to talk about communication, improving that. And so you said that you feel we do a commendable job when we're giving initiatives to them via email. And so we're working on other ways to communicate. So I'm curious, are we also going to tackle the communication from the administrators to the families and also like to the students, because that's a major concern that I know I've heard about a lot over the past month, and I'm sure other board members can attest to that as well. So can you just kind of give us just a little preview on how you guys have been talking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So where our focus is right now as we're trying to expand our weekly communications so that we are going beyond just the written to having the dialogue and the co-creation that goes from, say, cabinet and central office to the schools team, which is comprised of the school supervisors, down to the next layer, which is to the principals, to the next layer, their staff in the buildings, and then ultimately, yes, the community and families. We are, as we move forward with principal professional development over the course of second semester, we're really focusing on opportunities for the principals themselves to share their best practices for what they do in terms of the communication strategies they employ with their staff and the communication strategies that they also employ with their parents and community members. So as we have this opportunity for, again, this collaborative effort where we are consulting each other, with regards to adult learning, adults learn best when they're given opportunities to collaborate with their peers, with their counterparts in the field. And we have many principals that have fantastic practices in terms of how they have a regular cadence of communication with their staff and with their school communities. We want to be able to really highlight what those strategies and practices are so that all principals are aware of that. Because ultimately, you're never going to, if we have a top-down approach to how we cascade the why behind our initiatives, then there's not that ownership. And we want to make sure that we respect each principal's unique leadership style and give them the space and the autonomy to craft their messages to their staff and to the community according to what they deem best serves their staff and their community. So while we are having this collaborative opportunity to share what our best practices are, and we are moving towards a space where we do have this regular weekly cadence of communications to the community and to staff, we also want to make sure that we're respecting that autonomy at the same time as providing that exposure to best practices. But it's definitely part of the game plan.
Okay, and then one more question.
Can I just take a crack at just kind of simplifying a little bit of that, because there was a lot in that answer. Basically, we're saying if we get really clear with our principals, they'll get clear with their staff, community, and students. And so by investing all this time in being better with having conversations with our principal, we think they will be more effective because families and students are more likely to receive messages from their school community than from the district in most cases. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification, Dr. Jarrett. And just one last question for you, Mr. Gallagher. So I think that's great, with having the best practices being shared from the different principals that are excelling in that area. So say, for example, if there's one school or just a few that are struggling in that area, they get the best practices and then they're still not doing that. I guess, how are we following up with that?
that is where the schools team and the principal supervisors would come into play in providing more direct support for those principals.
Okay, thank you.
Were there any other questions before we move on to the board calendar? Okay. Very quickly, we have a few opportunities for the board in February. The first, as mentioned before, is the legislative breakfast on February 8th at East High School. On Saturday, February 12th, there is an opportunity to attend the Rockford University Annual Gala. And on Saturday, February 26th, we are holding our annual RPS Athletic Hall of Fame banquet. So just remember, you can find these at the board calendar, very conspicuously located on board docs. And that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions from the entirety of it?
In regards to the board calendar for next week, legislative breakfast, what are the parking arrangements? Like, I don't want to be on a wild goose chase trying to find.
That is actually a pretty great question. And
Ms. Senator, if you just let me know, give me a heads up where I will make sure you have a parking space. Just we will have someone at the door, and who will not only greet you, but I will also ensure that you have an ideal, optimal parking spot.
Is that all the board members?
All board members as well. Whoever's in attendance, you as well. Ms. McCullough, of course. You just let me know. I got you. I got you.
I do have one other question where it relates to the school administrators and principals and building that team and communication. What expectations does the district have of the principals in relating their plan of action to communicate and build their team? You indicated that they have the leeway of creating that and carrying out that, but what piece, how much of that information is communicated with the district?
I get to clarify, are you asking how much of the information that schools disseminate to their community is first shared with the district?
No, so for an example, if, say, the principal of Auburn or Guilford, their plan of action to communicate to their staff that will be communicated to the community, what's in place to hold the principals accountable to execute all of this?
Principals meet with their principal supervisor 1 hour every other week, and in these one-on-one sessions, that's where they would have the opportunity to have these discussions and to be able to vet them with their principal supervisors and seek advice or feedback.
And does that information ultimately get forwarded to Dr. Jarrett or yourself?
It would be conveyed to myself in our weekly Thursday meetings that I have with the team of principal supervisors, and anything that would come out of those meetings I would share with Dr. Jarrett on an as-needed basis.
Thank you.
That question actually just reminded me, as well as some feedback that I just heard at this past listening session that was just at Auburn. And even the follow-up email that we received from the principal mentioned that it was heard that students want to be included more in decision-making process and whatnot. And is there any way that students can possibly be a part of like this evaluation process or with the principals when we're having issues? Because you mentioned, of course, that they meet with their supervisors, which is great, but what type of feedback are we also collecting, like maybe from staff or the students as well? Is that something that is possible?
Absolutely, it's possible, and it is taking place. Dr. Tiffany Brunson and her team have been working closely with principals to tailor their communications around the needs that have been expressed by their students and by community members through listening sessions that have been taking place. It has not taken place comprehensively at all schools yet, but that is the end goal, is that we're moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, unless your light is on, Jude, for a question? No? Okay. I will pass the floor back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Siegel. Did you have any consent items to preview other than that? No, right? Okay, appreciate that. Mr. Connor, I'm going to give you the floor to lead the Performance and Monitoring Committee portion of the meeting.
And I do believe all of our items are consent items. Yep. So I will start with the 8th of February. Sorry, I had this up, and I think we have on there our normal, which is payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, monthly cash and investment, monthly finance, construction pay request log, managed work orders, fiscal year second quarter, and then we have Learning Partners additional funds, and that's Mr. Gallagher on behalf of Auburn, McIntosh, and RISA. Then we have the Kronos time clock refresh, and last of that part is the Kaplan SAT. So I will ask, is there anybody that would like to address the, just like 2 words on I, J, and K? Anybody on any of those that, are we good? Are there any questions on those? Yes.
Not really a question, but for some reason, like, Kaplan is showing up on my script for my committee, and yet it's included under your committee for the action item on February 8th. So it's, I mean,
That's an error, and
somebody needs to sort that out.
Yes, it's an error. It should be under planning and development. It's a new partnership. It's not a recurring contract.
Yeah,
okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so on those, back to my original request, are there any questions, but B, is there anything from the administration that you want to say? I actually have one quick thing, but I want to start with you to make sure that if you had anything to present. No. I do want to point out about the Kronos, and I think we've said this maybe before, is that this hardware refresh is due to this software upgrade. So it's really, it's the proverbial your hands are tied, so we're going to have to do it. But because Kronos, and just for the newer board members, Kronos sits at the center of all these schools. I mean, and buildings. So that's our timekeeping. So I don't know if there's anything. Go ahead, Mr. Rattel.
So I just want to point out, we did have this built in our 5-year strategic plan, but we did advance that forward for this upcoming fiscal year, just because we did upgrade that software to support a lot of these other departments like I&I and grants and some of that reporting that we get out of the new Kronos software. So we decided to move that ahead and purchase all the clocks up front, which is about 90 clocks throughout all of our buildings in the district.
Okay, before I go over to February 22nd, anything on that? Everybody good? Okay. February 22nd, let me just. Okay, those are the same standard ones, payroll, et cetera. So that's A through G, and then we've got the HVAC, which is H at Riverdale and West. And the E-rate infrastructure, is there anything quick from the administration you want to say on that? Is there any questions? Does everybody know what the E-rate is? Some board members may not. So could you at least take 2 seconds and explain why E-rate is a good thing?
Sure. So what E-rate is, we have 2 different categories, Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 E-rate is our internet services that we provide to our students, and this is backed by the FCC and their subservient called USAC that provides us reimbursement on that. And then we got our Category 2, which is our actual physical infrastructure that provides that internet to students. For the internet service, it's reimbursed at 90% based on our low income rate, and for our infrastructure, it's reimbursed at 85%. So what you're seeing with this particular bid that'll be coming forward is we've had some Wi-Fi access points in our buildings that have been there for a little over 8 years now, and there's new technology out that provides a little bit faster speeds to our students. So we're looking to replace all the access points in our buildings to provide a better experience for our students when they're connected to our Wi-Fi.
Any questions on that? Is that fairly clear, or go ahead?
Yeah, so we're only responsible for ultimately about 20%, is that what you're saying?
So there's, for this particular one, which is the E-rate infrastructure, which is Category 2, we'd be responsible for 15%, and that's based on our maximum that we can, so 85% will be billed directly to the feds, and then we'll pay 15% of that.
Thank you.
So one thing I will point out on this, and that's a really good question, is we have in the past missed some deadlines on this. So this is something to note going forward, that E-rate is probably one of the most important schedules to make sure that we always do that. And administration has been pretty good on that, but I do want to point that one out because it's a huge subsidy for us in particular because of the poverty level. So, and I think there are plans that the administration has to really make the environment better for all kids and their connectivity. And so things like this, I think, help form the foundation of that, if I remember correctly. And that was my little 2 minutes. Anybody, any other questions, anything? Okay, did I miss anything, Ms. Dedman? No. Whew. Oh, that's amazing. All right, cool.
Warp speed tonight. Okay. Mr. Rollins, and thank you, Mr. Connor. Mr. Rollins will now lead the Planning and Development Committee portion of the meeting.
With the board's permission, I'm going to take things out of order. We have Ms. Noble here to talk about item D, the bond refunding sale update. She's from out of town, so I'm sure that our meeting is probably far more interesting than anything else she could be doing tonight, but I thought maybe we'd give her a chance to give her a presentation and then get on her way if she wanted.
You did not have to do that, Tim, but thank you. I appreciate it. I always enjoy all the work you guys are doing. You're ahead of the curve on most of your peers across the state. Is this in the packet? There we go. Awesome. All right, lovely. Okay. Well, I am here to fill you in on the results of the bond refunding, which took place last week. But I wanted to summarize the results for you guys. The key pivot point I'll share going into this is the credit rating upgrade that the district received. And perhaps you've already heard this great news, but the district's credit rating was moved back up to a level that you had achieved previously of AA-. But we did see a downgrade a few years ago in response to a number of concerns that the rating agency identified. With the effort of your administration and all the great work that you all have been doing in financial management, we were able to shift that back to the AA- level, which is kudos to you and a great accomplishment, and definitely did impact this sale and result in additional savings to your taxpayers. So congratulations. We are in a pretty rocky time in the bond market right now, as we all discussed when we decided to move forward with the bond refinancing, that we felt like we were moving into a time of upward moving interest rates. And you can see that we are doing exactly that. It hasn't been too stark yet. If you look at this graph shows, the lower one shows interest rates for the last 21 years and the upper one just the last year. So you can see over the last 20 years we are still very much at the low point historically, but we are that very far right-hand part of it. And then the upper graph, you can see it a little more clearly. We are now ticking upward. And this is due very much to just what's been taking place in the economy, the inflationary pressures that we have been seeing for the last year, but I think everybody has finally accepted that they probably aren't transitory, and that the Fed is going to have to start raising rates, and that we are likely to be in for some longer-term inflationary pressures. So going into last week's Federal Reserve Board meeting, there was a lot of anxiety about what the Fed was going to say. We purposefully chose to enter the market Thursday after the Fed meeting on the hopes that we would achieve what often happens after the Fed meeting, which is lots of anxiety leading up to the Fed meeting. Then the Fed meets and everybody's all stressed about what they might say, and they build in a lot of price escalation due to their concerns, and then post-Fed meeting, everybody breathes a sigh of relief, and we see a little dip down, a little improvement in rates, and some calm return to the market. Sadly, we did not see that. We saw all the anxiety as expected, and then the anxiety just kept right on going afterward. So we were in a very challenging market. A lot of buyers are sidelined right now because they do believe rates are going up, and they're not sure when the Fed's going to raise rates, and more importantly, by how much. So we did enter the market Thursday morning. We did achieve full sale of the bonds with 3 very large buyers, the largest of which is Vanguard. We did achieve notable savings for the district, just summarized here, of a little over $5 million in net present value savings, about 7.6% savings. As we discussed when we entered this process, the goal is we want that to be at least 3% savings. That's sort of the industry standard. So you're more than double that. Your all-in interest cost is at 2.744%. But there is what's called in here a forward premium, because we're not closing on these bonds. They don't deliver until November. So we are paying about 0.5% basically for a rate lock. Okay? So the question that Greg and I went back and forth on Thursday was, do we pay the 50 and lock it in, or do we roll the dice and wait? We could wait a month, we could wait 6 months, we could wait all the way until November. Do we think rates are going up 50 basis points or 0.5%? Do we think they're going to get any better than they were last Thursday? At the end of the day, Thursday rates went up about 0.1%. On Friday, they went up another 0.1%. So we've lost already 0.2 of the 0.5 that we locked in. Yesterday and today, they've been pretty stable. So we've just kind of held our own since last Thursday, after we lost those about 18 basis points we've lost since we locked. So, you know, we took our best bet. Greg and I did. We thought it was pretty likely. All the economists, I think, are pretty consistent in saying the Fed's likely to raise at least 50 basis points. And that's on the short end of the curve where the Fed is raising. That likely has bigger impact on the longer end of the curve. And you guys are more in the 10-year range, not in the 1-year range where the Fed is. So if the Fed's raising 50, that's likely to translate more into 60, 70, maybe 80 on the longer end. So Greg and I made the decision and we lacked. So this is where we are. All of these savings go back to the taxpayers. So it just results in a reduction in your tax rate, which you won't be able to see very well on that screen, but it is shown in the green column on that page. No savings to the taxpayers for the first few years because you don't have any bonds maturing in those years. The savings occur a little bit longer out. But it is direct tax rate savings to the taxpayers. No extension of the bonds took place. And then on this slide, you can see the buyers that we had, Vanguard, Mariner, and Manulife. And those are the interest rates by year. So I am happy to answer any questions. This was a very long, involved process, a lot of time and effort by your administration on the credit rating process, particularly. Greg, literally day one, was sitting on the rating presentation. So it's kudos to everybody that we were able to get in the market when we did. And Greg and I both will be watching this closely and see if we took the right side of the bet, but we did take the bird in the hand. So anything I can answer for you guys.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, one question is, and I know it's hard to probably put an exact number, but us having that, what did you say, AA minus rating, any sense of how much that would save us in practical terms if we were to look at this chart? Just an estimate. I'm not asking you to recrunch numbers. Just give us a sense of how important it is about that.
Yeah, so it's worth about 10 basis points to you guys. So your all-in TIC is about a 275 there. TIC stands for true interest cost. Yeah. So that would be about a 285 instead of a 275. And each basis point is worth about $49,000 to you. Yep. So
times about 10, right?
Yeah, right.
So yep. 500 by anybody's math.
Right.
So really having, I mean, the one point that I would make also for anybody listening is that the RPS administration has really improved their financials, you know, through the work in the finance department. So I think, you know, kudos to them for really shepherding that process. And I have to say, thankfully, the state of Illinois got their act together a little bit because that made a big difference. But I think the point is that we will see those savings in something that we, in a sense, don't have to do. We've already done it. In other words, we've really gone after these, you know, balancing the budget, making sure that things made sense fiscally. So I think, you know, it's always good because we've been criticized many times for the size of administration, but clearly you need a number of people who really know what they're doing on this over a long period of time to really focus on things like this. This is not, you know, the sexiest part of the conversation, but it's really necessary. And when you run an organization that's this big, those are big dollars, and you can spend more money on our students and our faculty and staff because of just things like this. So I really think it's very important that we look at this and look at it as a success. The other thing I will say, too, I give great credit to the finance and the administration in general for really focusing on something like this, to do this with the bonds. And the fact that we gave flexibility as a board, you know, which was very good, means that we could take advantage of this. So I have to say, I hope people who are sensitive to the message to taxpayers are watching this, because this is the way it should run. And I'm going to give kudos in advance to the whole staff on this. Really good job.
Oh, absolutely. You're running a business here, and it's a very sizable one. And it came across that way in the rating presentation as being run like a very efficient, well-oiled machine. And the rating upgrade was not even a question. It was very well earned. So big difference from 6 years ago when they spoke with the district. So
anyone else have any questions? All right, well, thank you, and thanks for saving us $5 million.
A pleasure always. Thank you.
All right, now let's go back to item A, the administration update, fiscal year 2023 budget, overview of budget development priorities and assumptions. You have this presentation in your on your board docs. So this is, again, this is for 2023 budget. This is the budget that we are just now starting to work on that will go into effect, well, in retroactively, but the fiscal year starts July 1st of 2022. Is that right? Yes. So our first item tonight, now here are some high-level points and changes since presented at the October committee meeting. The preliminary operating budget shortfall is currently estimated at $3.4 million. There will be continued work and efforts to bring forward a break-even operating budget for fiscal year 2023. Departments are expected to budget only what is needed. Funding to schools is increased by 7%, which is the anticipated increase of evidence-based funding. The 2022 tax levy assumption does not include new property or the allowed CPI increase. By not including these allowed levy amounts, the district is foregoing an estimated $7.5 million in levy revenue. Health insurance claims are estimated at $52.7 million for 2023, which is a 3% increase from the 2022 projection of $5.1 million. Administration will continue to monitor and revise budget assumptions throughout the budget development process until final adoption on September 27th, 2022. So the high level there is just first look, they're looking at a deficit of $3.4 million. We're at the beginning of the process, and they know that their job is to try to give us a balanced budget, because that's what the board is always looking for. Are there any questions or discussions on the 2023 budget development priorities and assumptions? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is the 2023 budget requests. As we've done in the past, we're going to sort of chunk these and do certain departments. We're going to start doing a couple of departments at the committee of the whole meetings, a couple of departments at the board meetings. So first up is, of course, Mr. Earl Dotchin Jr. He's going to present the fiscal year 23 budget presentation for communications, welcome, center fit, security, fine arts, and athletics. Mr. Dotson.
Good evening again. Thank you for this opportunity. So the communications department, we operate under goal 2 for the most of our departments under engaging partnerships. These are the departments that I have the honor of overseeing, working with a bunch of wonderful people who make these things happen. This is what the org chart looks like for said departments. For the communications department, these are their core functions. And communication highlights, I just want to draw your attention to really great job from that team on that high level ongoing communication around some of those challenging topics that we've had to deal with. And then again, I'm also very happy about we've launched that new mobile app, and I think approximately 4,000 of our families have downloaded the app thus far, so doing well there. And then if you look at the budget summary for communications, if you look at the variance for purchase services, we've added some items for professional development there, and we've had some fee increases for some of the software that we use. And then the other variance there for capital is just around some of the, we want to make sure we budgeted for some hardware and some audio-visual equipment as needed. And then here is a detail of our contracts. And then for our FY23 requests for the Family and Community Engagement Department, we cut a position for this year, but due to the kind of increased workload with the great work Maureen Kirschman is doing with our parent liaisons and some of the ARP ESSER funding, we are requesting to have that position reinstated so that we can continue some of the work and some of those initiatives that we have done in the past. The return on investment, obviously, it's just very important to continue that high-level district communication to our core audiences, and then sharing those student and staff success stories.
Can I suggest that we just ask for questions after each department, because that might focus us a little more. So does anybody have any questions about that part of the presentation? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have a quick one.
Yep.
Mr. Dodson, you had mentioned that you were in the process of getting the second position added back again.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that just going to be a part-time one, or?
Be a full-time position.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes. Okay, family and community engagement. Here are the core functions of the Family Community Engagement Department. And then the highlights, again, just the return of being in person. We have a very robust community of volunteers, and so managing that whole volunteer database and doing all the background checks, team continues to do a great job with that. And then our return on investment, again, I just draw attention to the work Maureen Kirschman has done with coaching and helping develop and doing training for our building parent liaisons. That continues to be just a great add-on, and the evidence is in the number of principals who continue to request that position. So, great work there. Next up is the Welcome Center and Families in Transition. Core functions of the Welcome Center. And I think that the big highlight here is again, it's coming, the plan to bring online enrollment to our families. We're going to do it. Board President McCullough is coming. I know.
Will my kids still be in school?
No. Shout out to Mr. Jason Barthel and his collaboration. I think we're going to do it this time. We're going to do it. So the first one in 2023, I think January, will be registration online first, and then 2024 January will be enrollment. So, but registration coming first. It's coming. I'm not going to promise, but I'm certain. Families in Transition. So I'm very proud of this. Christina Raber has done a great job of incorporating the Families in Transition program into the Welcome Center. They just did a great job of training all of those specialists to be able to enroll those families in transition families. So proud of that work, and that's the highlight there as well. I really think they've done a great job of making sure everyone can perform those functions. And you'll see that reflected in the salaries and benefits, where before we called the Families in Transition, they were advocates or specialists, where the Welcome Centers, they were support professionals. And so the increase there is we were able to align the work and the salaries with the work that they do, so that because they all do that work now, they're all on the same level playing field there. And then the other increase there, other miscellaneous, purchase services, the increase there is that all of them are notaries. So we had more notaries that we had to renew for this year. And then the capital increase, other miscellaneous there is we have a address verification system. So we've added some more users, and they've just increased their fees there a tad. And there is the contract for that system. And then again, the return on investment, as we all know, that when we do a great job of making sure that students are enrolled in their own schools, there is a correlation with state funding. So they perform a very important function. Process improvement. Here are the core functions of that department. The highlights, again, I'm very proud of, obviously they've been doing this work over time, but to get to a 98% registration rate is phenomenal. To send those packets out and have all of our families, 90% of them return those packets, and then have a central focal point of entering the data really does a lot for maintaining data integrity for our district. So very proud of the work that they've done there. Then again, that last bullet, there it is again. Online enrollment and registration is coming, I'm telling you. All right, don't doubt us.
He only says that because I've been asking for a decade.
I know, you notice I'm looking right at you. And here is the budget summary. And the variance decrease, again, we are projecting because this year, because we spent a lot on postage and self-addressed envelopes, we are projecting that decrease is going to because not all of our families are going to use that online feature, but we think a significant number of them will, and we won't need to mail out as many registration packets, but we certainly will need to do some of that. So, but that is the variance there. And then here are the contracts. Thank you again for approving the Scribbles software record conversion. We have 21st century. We have digitized records. Yes. And then our requests. We are requesting another auditor, and this is just because it's a huge workload for one person to audit all of our office professionals throughout the district, and so we think to add another one would certainly be a much more efficient process. And then we want to increase the 10-month clerical trainings to 12-month. For the fact, as you see there, that most of the work is done in the summertime, so that's when we really need them. So we're asking for clerical trainers to be 12 months. Shout out to Mr. Zedeker, who's been very helpful. Thank you, Maddie. Easy. Return on investment. Again, I think it's important to highlight that 98% essentially registering our families has really been a benefit for us. Fine arts. Here are the core functions of the Fine Arts Department. Again, the highlights, I can't say enough about those opportunities for collaboration with our community, and expanding those opportunities and really engaging our community around the fine arts has gone very well. And here is the budget summary. The purchase services variance is because we've had an increase in the venues that we use. They've increased their prices. And then the capital increase is for instrument repair, so that's gone up slightly. And then the other miscellaneous slightly increase is as we add instruments and grow, we have to store them somewhere, so we want to make sure that that's in the budget as well. And then you see the details of our contracts. And here's the return on investment. Again, the creating those events for community engagement has, again, been very beneficial. And then athletics.
Can we ask a question?
Oh, sure.
Are we doing the petting zoo? Are we bringing that back post-COVID here?
I have not. We have not heard that as of yet, Ms. McCullough. Thank you for the question. That's certainly something we will consider, but I am not aware that we're bringing that back as of yet.
And so the venue rental, what would that be for?
So the venue rental would be for All City Fine Arts Week, and so we rent out Rock Valley College, Memorial Hall, the Coronado, the Nordloff. In the past, several of those didn't charge us, but they're charging us this year. So that's the increase.
Okay, and that's why it was zero. And
that is correct.
Mr. Siegel, did you have a question too?
It actually is a couple sections back. The light just got missed, so I'll just wait till the end. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. Mr. Connor?
Yeah, just to be clear on this, if I'm correct, fine arts really is totally separate from Kappa, so none of this is the same dollars, is that correct?
It depends on what area, what exactly area are you talking
So like
about?
things like instruments and all that, so.
It's all in there. Yep.
Okay, so the Kappa program does take instruments from here, so
sir.
Kappa will not have separate line items for all these.
No, sir. Yes, it's all involved. It's all.
Okay, and is that true for things like venue and et cetera?
Yes, sir.
All those, okay.
Yes, sir.
So there are, have we already had I don't think we've already had the programs, have we? I'm sorry.
Find out. It's March, the first week in March.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I did make myself clear. For the actual programs like Kappa, et cetera, have we had that budget yet?
I don't believe so. No, sir.
I don't know that we get, those aren't departments, so wouldn't they just fall into the schools?
School.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't get that separate?
We'll get that as part of the schools team budget presentation.
Okay, all right. That's I knew it was there. Okay. That's all I was asking.
Okay, and then athletics, again, the core functions of the athletic department. Then the highlights, again, I think it's just great to relaunch those athletic opportunities for our families being back in person, having families back. That participation has just been great. And again, we're going to still have those outings as well. You saw the participation rate, and then budget summary. The purchase services increase, that variance is just our contract with OSF for athletic trainers. We didn't have enough budgeted last year, so they raised the contract, and so that is reflected there. And then you can see the detail of contracts there. Yes.
It says the same.
Yeah, so last year, I think it was less than that. I want to say it was about maybe 20,000 less, 278, I believe was the number. And so this just reflects the new contract with OSF. And then our return on investment for athletics.
On the athletics, if you could go back to the participation rate bar.
Mr. Brown, I tried to skip over that.
I know.
I was hoping you weren't.
I caught you.
I was waiting if you were going to ask that question at me, but go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So, I didn't think about this when we were going through it ahead of time. Are those calendar years or school years?
Calendar year. That's what I'm going to say. Calendar year.
So 2021 was the full year.
Yes.
All right. Well, we all know why that is. It's pretty ugly. The comment that I made before, when it was just us talking. Was,
yes.
So the numbers have gone down drastically. We're below our 2015 numbers, and yet the costs keep going up. So the athletic trainers, we have to spend more on athletic trainers, even though we have drastically fewer people participating?
Yes, it's a requirement to have them there at all of our venues and all of our events, to have them on site. And we had an increase, and sometimes sometimes when there's several events going on at the same time, we just want to make sure that those are fully staffed. So, yes, sir.
And if I could just interject, inflation is impacting all of our budgets, number one. Number two, I think we're optimistic, perhaps overly optimistic, but optimistic that conditions may look different as we go through the FY23 budget in the school year in terms of more optimal conditions for participation. I don't know that we'll get back to our peak years, but I do think we can be optimistic and have reason for optimism that our numbers will exceed the FY21 number.
Is the athletic trainer budget, did we put that out for bid?
Yes, I believe we did.
And did anybody bid besides OSF?
I am unaware of that question, Ms. McCullough. I do not know who else bid it.
We've had problems finding
I can find out for you.
Bids in the past is the reason I ask.
I'd be happy to provide you with that information.
Maybe we'll have a few more homeschool students join our athletics as well.
There that is. Return on investment. Security services. Core functions of security services. Highlights, I think the police contract continues to perform well, even though their numbers are down and we didn't have our full roster, but still a great partnership. And then Fred is just, I mean, it's all about cameras. Camera installation is the #1 request from a security perspective from our principals, and so we have really been going hard in that area. So that will continue. And then purchase services, the variance increase there is in part, we just had, as you know, our security guards requests from schools. Typically, that's a very static budget. We try to, as we last year, we kind of compress those numbers. But this year, we had a number of requests from principals for more security guards, not just those that were already staffed, but we had more events and we had more requests for security guards. And then certainly our camera, we're going to keep installing cameras. You can see our detail of contracts there for security services. And then you can see our request, the work that we think we have the capacity to do for the next year in terms of installing cameras. Last year, if you notice, you can see in FY22, we really focused on elementary schools, whereas this year is going to be more middle and high school, where it'll be more camera replacement and the life cycle of other cameras. And so that's the request where we're going to really focus on middle and high schools for this upcoming year. Yes, Ms. McCullough.
What is visitor management system, please?
That is our Raptor management system, and so that's for our volunteers. When they show up in our schools, they kind of check in. The office professional checks them in through that system. It does an automatic background check of those individuals. So they've raised their fees. You notice they've also raised their fees as well, slightly. And of course, return on investment is providing a safe and secure environment for our students and staff. Thank you.
Mr. Siegel? Yeah, actually, I'm glad that last slide came up. It kind of pertains to the one I was going to ask about, slide 71. And that is the volunteers. Can you speak a little bit about what the volunteer environment looks like this year? I mean, is it greater than normal? And how many volunteers are placed in the schools, and what is the work that they're doing?
So I don't have an exact number of how many, but I can tell you that it is robust. Volunteers are definitely back in our schools, and the work that they do varies depending on the school that they're at. So some schools want volunteers who will just read with their students. There are some that there's a mentoring component as well, but it all depends on the needs of the building, depending on the building that they're at.
Okay. When I first started on the board, there was a metric that was commonly discussed, and that was the number of volunteer hours that were contributed to the district and what that meant in terms of a real savings to the district. And it's not something that I have seen for a while. Is it possible to compile that and have some sort of a report given to the board? Sure, we can certainly look into that. We shied away from that somewhat because of obviously with the impact of the pandemic, they're just volunteers just went to a complete halt. And so as we're slowly revising that, we have considered that, but then taking on some of those additional duties. We certainly still manage that whole system, but that is not as much of a focus, but I'm certainly happy to bring that back to our team and talk about how can we bring those numbers and that information back to the board. Happy to do that, sir. Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions for Mr. Dotson? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the new facilities master plan discussion. Mr. Phillips.
Good evening. As Mr. Rollins said, if Connor gets our present, there we go. As Mr. Rollins said, the purpose of tonight's presentation is to start a discussion focused on a new facilities master plan. I'd like to walk through a few initiatives we've completed over the past 2 years that will help facilitate the conversation. The district implemented new universal goals that will be a central focus as we develop our new strategic plan. This work can help guide our planning as we envision how our facilities are supporting our teachers and students as they work towards these universal goals. In fiscal year 20, we completed a comprehensive facilities condition assessment. At that time, we evaluated 46 assets. Those are 44 buildings and our 2 stadiums. They total building area of 4.92 square feet with a total replacement value of $1.7 billion. Our 5-year facilities condition index cost is $529 million, and basically that is all system renewals and replacements that need to take place within the next 5 years. Our average asset age of our buildings is 50 years, and our 5-year average facilities condition index ratio was 0.32, which falls in the fair range. Wanted to take a minute just to refresh everybody's memory of how we get to the facilities condition index number. Basically, that is the sum of our near-term requirements and system renewal costs divided by our asset current replacement value. So basically, that's all needs that need to happen within the next 5 years divided by the current replacement value. The lower our assets facilities condition index value, the better the building's overall conditions is assumed to be. So like a golf score, the lower the score, the better the condition of the asset. The other ratio we look at is a requirement index, and that's basically a sum of all of our needs, 10 years and non-time based, divided by the asset's current replacement value. Once again, the lower the asset's RI value, the better the building's overall condition. Currently, our average requirement index number is 0.5, which falls in the poor range. Also in FY20, we completed a building utilization analysis with RPS Associates. At that time, we determined we have a functional capacity of 29,171 seats in all of our buildings, K through 12. While our overall capacity is good across the district, we're about 85% utilization looking at our total portfolio. We do have localized pressure with schools well above 85% utilization. At our elementary schools, that's 6, which would include Brookview, Cherry Valley, Welsh, Whitehead, and Riverdale. 3 elementary schools, Eisenhower, Risa, and Flynn, and 3 high schools being East, Guilford, and Jefferson. In March, RSP Associates will be here at the Committee of the Whole to provide our 21-22 enrollment analysis. I had an opportunity to take a look at the report, and I added a chart because this will be something we'll need to consider as we talk about a new facilities master plan. RSP is projecting declining enrollment starting in school year 22-23 out to 26-27, a total reduction of 1,035 students. That is broken down, 53 students across our elementary schools, 431 students in middle school, 548 students in high school. While our elementary school numbers don't seem too bad, we really want to explore why we're losing people at the secondary level and where they're going to. So that'll be something we discuss in March when RSP is here to provide that enrollment analysis as well as their board sub-district realignment recommendation. As we continue the theme of extending time, in this case by improving our facilities, we'll be spending ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER dollars to improve our HVAC, which upgrades, replacements, and will include air conditioning infrastructure. As you know, with these dollars, our goal is to air condition 100% of our classroom buildings. So over the next 3 summers, we'll be working in 31 schools, starting this summer, 22-23. Actually, Mr. Connor mentioned 2 schools, Riverdale and West HVAC, that'll be coming to the board for approval at the end of February. What I do want to point out, though, these HVAC upgrades are going to have a positive impact on the facilities condition assessment on system renewals that were identified during that process. So as we look, we do have a very tight timeline with our dollars coming from the government. ESSER 2, we have approximately $50 million. The projects need to be complete by September 30th, 2023, with all my dollars spent within 120 days. Our ESSER dollars, we have $107 million. Those, just a year after, those projects have to be complete, September 30th of 2024. Once again, we have 120 days to ensure all dollars are spent. As we take a look at just all of our funding sources to date, we've mentioned $157 million in ARP ESSER dollars. Ms. Noble was here to talk about the bond refinance. Those dollars have lowered a little bit to around $5 million. Projects we talked about, deferred maintenance identified during our facilities condition assessment. We've also made a commitment annually for our corporate personal property replacement tax to fund between $10 and $20 million annually to address our deferred maintenance identified in our facilities condition assessment. So over a 5-year period, we'll have an opportunity to spend between $213 and $263 million. As we look at future considerations, as you know, we're in the process of talking about a new special program, an international baccalaureate. We also may want to talk about reacquiring the Samuelson Center. Could be used for career and college readiness programs. We have in the past talked about upgrading our high school science labs across the district. And last but not least, looking at safety and security across the district. So as we start the discussion portion of the presentation, there are 2 items that we're looking to get answered tonight. The length of the next facilities master plan. We would be recommending 5 years, but we're definitely very interested in hearing the board's thoughts on that. And then lastly, when do we want to get started? So I'm just going to open up the floor for discussion, or back to you, Mr. Rollins.
Anybody? Oh, Mr. Siegel has his light on.
I guess I'm struck by the notion of an appreciable decrease in enrollment over the next few years. I'm not sure how long they said that was going to be. Like, was that over the next 10 years?
So over the next 5 years,
the next
from
5 years.
22-23 school year to the 26-27 school year, they're projecting a decrease of 1,035 students.
Does that relieve any of the desire to acquire more square footage? You know, I'm thinking like the Samuelson Center. And is there going to be an impact on adding square footage at a time when enrollment is declining? I mean, it's just something to think about. I don't expect a really detailed answer just off the cuff.
So, Mr. Siegel, I think that's a great question. I think the other thing we'd want to look at, consider, and discuss is what type of programs? Well, specific enrollment may be going down, projected to go down. Is there an opportunity to move or relocate programs into a space as I talked about at the high schools, East, Guilford, and Jefferson being well above 85%, Guilford being over 100% utilized at this point, and Jefferson and East not far behind. So I think very good discussion to have.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Phillips, if you could go back to slide 17. I'm not clear on how the bond refinance gives us $6 million more to spend.
So that's what, after Ms. Noble's presentation tonight, I think that we revised that to $5 million. Is that correct? And
no. So all we did was we issued bonds, and we got the money from those bonds, and we have that money. And all we've done is refinance those bonds, and we're going to save the taxpayers $5 million by not levying that extra $5 million. Doesn't put $5 million in our pockets. So the bad news is I think you've got another $5 million to come up with.
I have a question, and I think Ms. Pearson does too. Did you want to go first, Denise? Okay. And your question about 5-year, 10-year, last time it was 10-year, which gets so far away, but because we have such a short timeline on our ESSER funds, it seems like we really need to look at that 5-year period. But here's my question. There's a whole lot of money to spend. There's a whole lot of HVAC to do. And there's a whole lot of shortage of worker bees out there to do the work. I mean, have we projected our costs according to the fact that we might have to pay more just to get it done within that period of time so that they, I mean, because the bids could happen?
So I think that's the big question. Yes, our engineering teams have put together rough order of magnitude budgets taking into account inflation, supply chain issues, as well as worker shortages. I think our big question will start to be answered at the end of February when we receive our first bids at West and Riverdale. I think everybody's kind of up in the air as far as, you know, how much impact is this going to have? And to your point, we are competing regionally with a number of different projects. So
right. So my question was, you know, are we going to be realistic and are our numbers going to be correct? But as you said,
so the 157 is what we're receiving, 50 from ESSER 2 and 107. So we need to work within that budget. So as this first year's projects come online, we may need to make some adjustments in year 2 and 3. You know, once again, our focus is to utilize those dollars to the fullest to get 100% of our classrooms air conditioned.
Can you just speak a little bit to how you prioritized which were 2022, 2023?
Correct. So we assessed all of our buildings, and the buildings with the least amount of air conditioning were the buildings that ended up first on our list.
Auburn, Brookview, Conklin. So that's, whoops, sorry, 20. So for 2022.
So we've got 10 schools.
Bloom, East, Flynn, Guilford, Lathrop, Lincoln, Riverdale, Spring Creek, Washington, and West are
correct.
all the ones with the least amount of air conditioning.
Correct.
And they do span, you know, it looks like all parts of the district. I just want to make sure that we were using some sort of metric that was.
Yeah, some of our newer buildings with the most air conditioning are actually on our west side. Lewis, Lemon, Riverdale is 100% air conditioned. Barber, Risa, both Kennedy and Auburn. Kennedy has more air conditioning than Auburn does, but both of those. And McIntosh has some.
Thank you.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah. If I'm correct on this, so part of it was to the question that's being raised about how good our numbers are, can you remind us of how we ended up on the first 10-year plan on that?
Yeah, so in the end, we were over budget by $5 million or 2% over 10 years. Ideally you want to be, on budget, but from an industry standpoint, over 10 years with inflation and changes, 2% is fairly good.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there was a pretty substantial impact of asbestos abatement that was not in there originally, that as we went through the projects, we found more and more. And rather than leave that, we corrected that at the time.
That is correct. We made a decision from a life safety standpoint to continue to abate as we renovated schools.
Yeah. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I want to make it clear that I think the estimates were pretty good on our first go-around here, but there were factors. And so what full disclosure, Mr. Phillips and I have talked about this at great length. And one of the things I'll say is that I've asked similar questions. And the numbers here, my view is that the competition, number one, is much more intensive than it was when we did this first time. So if you look at the large, not to mention the casino, but there's a whole lot of building going on right now. So that's one factor, but the other side to that is that there's fewer people to fill all the jobs. And, you've got things like the casino up in Beloit and many other pieces of competition for this. So that's one thing. Everybody knows about supply chain problems, and my view is that that's probably going to continue. And one of the things is being one of your local nerds, thank you very much. That's a smile underneath there. That's is that if you look at the way containers are done, one of the largest in the world is at Long Beach, California, and there's been backups there of 100 ships or more. So my point is that I don't think that's going to go away overnight, and I'm sure people are going to estimate the best, but that's another area where I think we can really think about some issues. Cost of materials, and I'll remind everybody that if you've looked at cars or a lot of other things, the lack of chips has really made a difference. Well, that's just one part. Timber's gone up and down. That's been kind of crazy. Concrete, there's so many aspects to this that I think one of the things I would say is that I think this is a point where the administration has done a really good job in trying to anticipate this and factor it. But I would say going forward, my opinion is that we're not going to be as lucky as we were the first time. And the first time we had a lot of these same questions, and the environment was, we got pretty lucky on a lot of things, and our costs didn't go up. So I think that we should go into this with our eyes open to say, in spite of our best efforts. Now, on the other side, we've had all kinds of criticism for years about the lack of air conditioning. And there are other pieces to this, but let's not forget for a minute that that's not a big part of this. And what I'll say is that some of our biggest expenses are going to be East, West, Lincoln, Roosevelt, because those buildings are all within a stone's throw of 100 years. And so I think there'll be decisions to be made, what we want to do. So I'm glad this topic was brought up, but the one thing I'll say here is I think we need to plan what's right for our students in the community, but the board really needs to, I think, plan for things that are going to happen, because even as well planned as it was last time, we had all kinds of issues with, we found things, I'm losing my mind, I can't remember, but we found things that were underneath the ground as we dug. And then, of course, we had the screw up at one of our grade schools. And I mean, so there are things that are going to happen. So I'm, you know, my perspective is we've done a good job. I think this is really well done, but this is the reality check on this one. And I think we should expect it, meaning there's going to be issues.
And Mr. Connor, to your point, we are addressing the majority of our legacy buildings this first summer. So we do fully expect, because of the supply chain, that these first 10 projects will span 2 summers. And so as we bring our contractors on, we will be having in-depth conversations on phasing over this summer into the following summer. The other adjustment we're going to make, we were kind of behind the 8 ball as we brought on our engineers to begin with, but once these first projects are bid and we begin getting them under contract, we are going to release our engineering teams to start designing our second phase of projects so we can get those out to bid earlier and get our supply chain moving quicker in preparation of the second summer. And we will continue into that, into our third phase.
I'm sorry, let me make it clear. I really, this was no criticism at all, but I think it's more awareness that as a board, this is something that needs to be almost expected given the conditions right now. And I didn't even talk about inflation, so there's a number of factors.
So your question was actually about timeline and what we thought, so I guess I'll share my thoughts. The first question that I've got, though, is what's your timeline for starting what you're talking about now? We're really kind of doing a mini capital plan or facilities plan now with the ESSER and the ARP ESSER funds. So are you really going to spend the next 2 years planning what you're going to do and then implement what we're talking about doing after September 30th, 2024, after we're done spending these dollars?
So I think, as Dr. Jared and I have talked about this a little bit, that we see these dollars kind of kicking off and being the start of a new facilities master plan, and working together to identify, are there any other items that we want to think about addressing as we talked about some of these other future considerations. High school science labs have been discussed in the past. We have the International Baccalaureate program. But, there were, during the first facilities master plan, there were a number of listening sessions with our schools and with the community to identify, projects and needs throughout the district. We definitely, through our facilities condition assessment, have identified, our deferred maintenance needs going forward. But are there other things within our schools from a programmatic standpoint that we also need to consider?
Okay. Well, I guess all I'm going to say is that the facilities plan, the 10-year plan that we did, was ambitious. It was expensive. We'll still be paying the bonds for that for quite a few years. I don't know that, personally, I don't think that we could get the funding to get another 10-year plan off the ground. I think we should probably take a more incremental approach and probably be looking at more like a 5-year plan and see what we can get done in a shorter plan and with less funding. But that's just me.
I've already had a turn. Ms. Pearson.
I just have a question similar to Mr. Siegel, in that the projection of a possible declining in the number of students and a possible acquiring building, could we consider specific programs that would be attractive enough to retain that thought process? And as we consider the possibility of acquiring buildings. If maybe we could slow that projection down or intercept it?
I definitely think that is an opportunity as we look at the Samuelson Center and how that's situated currently from a programmatic standpoint, and how we may be able to bring certain programs into that building and once again kind of revitalize and kind of hitting on something Mr. Gallagher has talked about in the past and bringing students to bringing things to students on how they learn, and so that may be an opportunity.
Thank you. And my last question is related to something Mr. Rollins mentioned, where you factored in the $5 million were related to the selling of the bond that was not actual money. So how will you reassess that, and where would that $5 million come from?
So that's something that I will definitely have conversations with Mr. Brown about as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Could somebody speak to, because the acquisition of Samuelson Center is the only actual additional building space that I see on a future consideration, and could somebody speak, just to put it in our heads as a board, have the thought process going, what is it you see doing there as a college and career readiness that would be different than what's at our high schools? Are we pulling people from our high schools? I don't understand I don't want to buy it and hope they'll come. I want to have a plan for it. So
I think it would be way premature to speculate. In fact, there's no guarantee that Rock Valley will even sell us the building or give us the building, as we've talked about. This has been hanging there for a while. We just felt it was important to throw out big picture ideas that have been ruminating. I don't think it would be responsible for us to speculate at this point.
But special programs, International Baccalaureate, isn't a big picture that we've been ruminating.
I think that's much more realistic.
That's a solid.
Yes, because we control our own destiny on that.
Ms. Mohammed?
So I was wondering, is there any way that our early childhood enrollment can maybe play a factor in the enrollment projections? Because I don't see where that's mentioned anywhere here on the slides. Like, for example, if these buildings continue to be successful, they have like a high enrollment rate, then ideally I would think that the students are then going to feed into the elementary schools, which would hopefully help decrease what we're thinking we're going to see here in the future.
So can you rephrase that, Ms. Muhammad, on your question?
I think I would be prepared to address that, Mr. Phillips. I think, Ms. Muhammad, I think one of the factors that limits our ability to kind of exponentially grow our early childhood programming is that it is a primarily grant-funded program. I think you are correct to anticipate there, at least earlier in this year, it looked like we may have some real momentum with the Build Back Better program that was potentially floating around the Biden administration. That could have led to dramatic increases in early childhood and birth to 3 programming, significant funding opportunities, perhaps for community partners as well as the district. At this point, that is not moving forward. I'm hopeful that early childhood for all will kind of be pulled out of that as a separate initiative, because it appears unlikely that the package will pass holistically at this point because the votes aren't there in the Senate. So we'll be monitoring that very closely. But I think early childhood expansion, unfortunately, as it stands, would take some type of state or federal expanded support to make dramatic increases, or the district would have to commit K-12 resources at a greater rate than they do. The board has been willing to make some limited investments in that area, but historically has not been comfortable going too far, because at some point then you're taking K-12 dollars away that were intended for those students to fund early childhood. So we can absolutely have that conversation. But I think some of the expansion opportunity will be driven by factors at the state and federal level as opposed to the local level.
So does that also pertain to just their renovations that they get to that's coming from the state and federal funds, or are we still prepared to offer some assistance in that area?
Yeah, we still cover the cost of the buildings locally.
Okay, thank you.
I guess a couple of other things that I would add. I think the projected decrease in enrollment, everything that I've seen indicates that our market share hasn't gone down. In fact, I think we've held our market share steady, and we may have even improved it. The decrease in enrollment, my guess would be they're looking at population trends. Rockford's losing population. Illinois is losing population. And we're losing population among people who have school-age children. The workers are leaving. And so that's not something we can control. When we talk about, and this sort of leads back to the discussion about acquiring additional buildings. When we did the first facilities plan, one of the things that we were telling people is our footprint's too big. We have too much space. Once upon a time, the Rockford School District had 40,000 kids. And, I was told stories about, we used to do double shifts in the high schools. There'd be a morning shift and an afternoon shift. And when we started the facilities plan in 2010, those discussions, one of the things that we were telling people is we've got too much space, it's inefficient, and it's going to save you money in the long run if we shrink our footprint. And so that is kind of what we promised people we'd do. Now, did we shrink it correctly? We have pressure points around the district. Maybe we didn't shrink it in quite the right way or in the right places. So those are all discussion points. But I do want to see us be cautious about simply adding square footage, because in the long run, if you just do this on a square footage per student basis, the higher your square footage is, there's a cost associated with that, and then you just become less efficient. Mr. Siegel?
And I guess I would add to your discussion of the actual question of do we want this to be a 5-year or 10-year, I would definitely be in agreement that a 5-year is going to be a lot more logical with all of the unknowns. We've been dealing with so many unknowns for the last couple of years. I think it'd be nice to minimize the number of those things when it comes to this massive of an idea.
Were there 2 questions? It was time frame, and what was your second thing you wanted to walk away with tonight?
When we want to start.
Well, and
when we want to start what? What do we want to call the start date of the new plan?
So,
is that what you're saying?
No, just kind of if there is planning that we wanted, when the board would like to start a planning phase.
I would think you'd want to start the planning phase as soon as possible. Okay. I kind of feel like, although I understand that most of this work for the next 2 years is specialized, but even so, as we've talked about, there's shortages of materials, there's shortages of supplies, there's shortages of workers. I think if we pushed out the rest of the work until after the ESSER and the ARP ESSER work was done, we'd probably be better off. That's, again, just a personal opinion. Anybody else have any thoughts on it? Mr. Connor's got his light on.
Yeah, I agree. We should start the planning right away. I don't think there's, from my view, no doubt. And I would agree with what seems to be a consensus on the 5-year focus. But what I would say is that I would recommend that we look at planning a little bit longer term, and that we do an implementation for the 5 years is the way I would look at it, because I think there's some long-term decisions that the board needs to make. And I alluded to some of it because we do have some older buildings. We do, even though we're holding our own, I think there are discussions on the education side. And again, in transparency, when I've talked to Mr. Phillips, one of the things I've said is that how we use the buildings and what we do in them really might drive the kind of buildings we have, and what you want to see for the district going forward. So what I would say is that I totally understand that the funding and, if you will, again, what I would consider the implementation side, to have a 5-year focus, it makes sense, and I agree. to float bonds would be difficult. There's just no question. But I think one of the things is that what I would not want to happen is that we start down a road of a year or two and we get to year 3 or what have you, and we do things to buildings and then say, oh, wait, we really don't want that building. Or, this work is not supporting what we see in the education. And I'll give you some examples. I think that, and I apologize if I'm taking thunder here, Mr. Bartel can throw something at me later, is that I know that the administration is thinking seriously about how we can improve the connectivity for all our students. I know that something that's really important, and we've all said as a board that's important. And I'm going to use that as the example that there's a lot of ways to do that. And so I would not want to have us go down a path and then decide, oh, wait, we should have done that. I would like that forethought to be done up front so that even though you're only funding the 5 years, you give a future board the option to continue down a path that makes sense and not redo it all the time. So it's not that again, you're not committing to the exact implementation, but while you have the people who are the experts in electrical and what have you, take advantage of them. But also I would say that the educational part, this is not what I'll call a technical exercise, meaning this is not buildings for their own sake. It's how do we deliver education better. So I think that this upfront planning process, I mean, my gut check is there might be a thought that that's, really facilities kind of thing. And the one thing we did do almost 10 years ago now is spend a lot of time on this very question. And I think this is a good time to do it. And one of the things I'll say is technology is changing incredibly. And I think there's a lot of things that you might want to anticipate, even though you don't want to put them in right away. So that would be my thought. So I would say 5 years is okay for an actual physical implementation, but I'd want the vision and that part of planning to be longer. I'd want to stipulate that the education side has to be thought through more than just 5 years. And I would say the planning to start as soon as possible.
Mrs. McCulloch.
So you asked when to start, and I heard Mr. Rollins say, well, we need to probably get through the ESSER money first, and I hear Mr. Connor saying, well, we really need to make a plan. We can't have a plan in place by next year. If we do the ESSER funds for the next, well, as they are in place for the next 3 summers, 22, 23, and 24, at least if we came up with a plan that perhaps started in 24, I mean, we'll take that time to look at how it affects us educational. We will see numbers in terms of, how many students we need to support, and we can take the time to do so. I mean, I'm trying to think how much time we spent on that 10-year plan.
But it took about a year.
It was at least.
It was actually more than a year because we had the upfront thing where we got the community together,
right,
who agreed to the vision, and then the second part was we actually came through with the implementation. What I'll say is I agree in part, but what I'll say is even the ARP ESSER, the fact is that a lot of this is around quality of air, and essentially we're translating as air conditioning. And I think there are other parts to it, but the only thing I'll say is one of the reasons our air conditioning costs are going to be as low as they are is that when we did that other plan, that was actually one of the things we did, is they roughed in a lot of the components for the air conditioning up front. And I don't know what the equivalent will be this time, but what I would say is we absolutely have to do the ARP ESSER, and that clock is ticking. I totally get that. But I think that the board needs to really consider the educational needs on this and the kinds of things that we need to account for. That would be, and I don't know what that means in terms of planning. I'll be drop dead honest, I haven't thought that through, but I would say that's an important piece, and that ARP-ESSER is really only the start to a lot of this. Well, one of the things I would say is, if we were doing this right on the planning part, we would say this part of ARP-ESSER helps provide that future view of what we want to see our education delivery to be, right? You would spend the ARP-ESSER dollars with at least an idea of what your end vision is. Not saying it would be completed, but at least you'd have an idea.
So I was going to finish that by saying that I hate to spend 2 years planning for a 5-year plan, but that's kind of where we are. We almost need to start now for a plan that starts in 2024. That's just one board member's thought. And we were talking about a shorter plan instead of a longer plan. I think that that's important, but that was how I came up with that thought.
And I think that's what I was suggesting too. I was suggesting we start now on the planning, but we spend 2 years, because frankly, I think we kind of rushed the planning last time, and there were things that, you know, if we'd spent a little more time thinking about them, we might have done differently last time. But then not plan on actually executing. You know, you do most of the work in the summers, and we're going to be doing our ESSER work through the summer of 2024. That you at least plan on starting to do most of the work in the summer. Then of 2025 is when you'd start your execution for the other parts of the work. But, you know, who knows? I mean, the ARP-ESSER work is being done school by school, so there might be other opportunities. I am just a little bit worried about, you know, like we've been talking about, scarcity of materials and workforce, and I think the longer you push it out, the more chance that that's going to work itself out.
But you would want to see then, I mean, because we have to have a plan in place by the fall of 2024 so that they can plan for 25. So
well, and do the contracts. You'd be doing the contracts over that school year for the construction to start in the summer of 2025.
That help you?
All right.
Does anybody else have?
Yes, I just have a quick question. So when will we start the contracts for the work?
The ARP-ESSER or facilities master plan work. So we were talking about planning, starting now, figuring 2 years of planning, and starting any contracts or any implementation of a facilities master plan would start the summer of 25.
Okay, yes, I was referring to the ARP because it's time sensitive for the
correct. So as Mr. Connor discussed earlier on in the Performance and Monitoring Committee, our first 2 projects are coming to board at the end of February. They were advertised for bid. Pre-bid is tomorrow. So our first bids, our first recommendations will come to the last meeting in February.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phillips. I'm going to share a short story. I'll make it short about planning and facilities. So when we started the 2010 plan, Mr. Schmidt, who was the chief operating officer at the time, found in our files, and I wonder if this still exists somewhere, a copy of the last previous master facilities plan that the district had done, which was in the late 1950s. So we went from the late 1950s until 2010 between master facilities plans. And he showed it to me. And what they did is they said, okay, here's Rockford. And what we obviously want to do, Rockford's going to grow like this. And so we're going to build new schools all around the perimeter of Rockford. So they did. They built 2 new high schools, one on each perimeter of the Rockford, which is where we got Auburn and Guilford. And we're going to build new, like, middle schools around the perimeter of Rockford, which is why we have what's now Marshall Middle School and the elementary school up there, because they just made the assumption that Rockford was going to grow like this. And it didn't happen. So nobody's got a crystal ball, but you also probably, if you're going to spend a lot of money, probably need to have a little better crystal ball than they had back in the late 1950s. All right, and with that, I've got the following items will be presented on the consent agenda for the February 8th, 2022 board meeting. Tier 1 PDSA, Xanadu grades 2 and 3 resource. One of Illinois' social science curriculum mandates provides that every public elementary school and high school shall include in its curriculum a unit of instruction studying the events of Black history. Xanadu is a publisher that can work with RPS to curate a collection of printed bound readers that would be aligned to relevant integrated literacy themes within our existing curriculum. The district would start with grades 2 and 3 and phase in grades K through 1 and 4 to 5 in fiscal year 2024. Does anybody have any questions about that? The second item is the one that Mr. Connor tried to steal. Kaplan offers targeted math and literacy instruction aligned to the SAT to assist students in developing strategies for standardized testing. The high schools have used academic approach in the past, but they require an on-site, in-person instruction which limits when students can participate and does not take into consideration quarantine or isolation. Kaplan was the only provider that allowed students the freedom to learn on their own, at their own pace, or select a day and time that fits their schedules. 50 students from each high school, Auburn, East, Guilford, and Jefferson, will have access to Kaplan for weekly SAT preparatory sessions and practice assessments. Student progress will be monitored utilizing practice SAT exams. I guess I've got a question about that. So we would not do this at Roosevelt? Who's on this? Who's got this?
This is mine. Roosevelt has elected not to focus on SAT in terms of Roosevelt's focus this year and the last couple of years. For their students' post-secondary success, they're focused on the rollout of dual credit opportunities with Rock Valley College. And Rock Valley College, the SAT is not a requirement.
Okay. Well, does anybody else have any questions about that? I can't.
Yeah, did you just read that there's 50 students from each school that will have access to the Kaplan?
That's what it says, yeah.
Is there a reason why the number is so low?
The number is based off of participation that we've had in past years. The reason that we're moving to Kaplan as opposed to academic approach, as Mr. Rollins had pointed out, in the past academic approach, because it required that live instruction on site that was synchronous, that typically had to be held on Saturdays. And as a result, despite providing ample barbecue for the students, we just had very low participation rates. So that 50, it represents, I don't remember the exact percentage increase, but I would say almost, it's higher than what participation has been in the past. I'll just leave it at a blanket statement like that.
And if there's student interest, we will never turn a student away.
Correct.
We'll find a way.
Will counselors be responsible for identifying the students that can participate in this, or how do we know, like, how will they be able to sign up for this?
Yeah, it'll primarily take place through the counseling departments at the home schools.
Okay.
Ms. Pearson?
Mr. Rollins, what, I may be missing something. What information where did you obtain that information, and am I missing it? And
so this is going to be part of the consent agenda for the Planning and Development Committee for the February 8th board meeting. So it was supposed to show up under Planning and Development in the consent agenda, but it shows up, as we just pointed out when Mr. Connor was going through his, it actually shows up right now under Performance and Monitoring, which was a mistake. So it's going to get moved over to Planning and Development. And the information, I'm just reading off my script, to be honest.
oh, okay, thank you.
But the consent agendas are attached to each of the board. That's that hard find where you have to go to board docs and then push the meeting and then push draft and all that. But Ms. Fromm is very kind to us, and she attaches them to these committee of the whole agendas, so they're right there for us.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is, so it's on there as an item, but it doesn't give any of this background information as far as what it's about. All right, and there are no consent items for the February 22nd, 22 board meeting. That completes the report of the Planning and Development Committee.
Thank you. Well, that does lead to the question that if something is attached, the consent agenda, I saw that it says it's in the workflow, Mr. Gallagher, the information specific to the item or any of the items that are on our consent agendas should be in place by the committee of the whole. Is that correct, Dr. Jarrett? Isn't that what we agreed on?
For consent agenda items,
I mean, if we're going to be raising them at the committee of the whole and presenting them to the board,
we can certainly,
attachments should be there.
we can certainly, yeah, they aren't always there in the planning meeting, but yes, ideally we would have the attachments by that time.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll now present the items for the governance committee. We have item A, which is the amendment to the intergovernmental agreement for the city police services. And this is directly from your administrative, forget what that word is that you guys write up. Anyways, the district and the city of Rockford Police Services negotiated an intergovernmental agreement for the city of Rockford Police Services. This would be effective July 1st and goes through June 30th of 2023. The district and the city have now tentatively agreed to amend this agreement to allow access by RPD to video recordings involving emergency situations. Approval of the amendment would also allow RPD to copy and or retain any video recordings which are reasonably part of an active police investigation of an emergency situation. Under the amendment, the district would provide video recordings to RPD for internal review purposes. Are there any questions or discussions for Ms. Goldsmith? Go ahead, David.
How does this differ from what's been done in the past when the Rockford Police Department has had an investigation they wanted cooperation with?
So typically in the past, if there are records that belong to the school district, they would have to either subpoena them or get them by a court order unless they were actively there in the school monitoring the video and saw it at the time of the event. If they wanted a copy, they would either have to subpoena or court order.
And since this is an intergovernmental agreement, does the school district maintain any control over how those videos get used in the future?
Once they're handed over in this context, the purpose would be to better protect and serve our students and the population. So the example would be the recent incident at Auburn, where the city requested access to the video immediately following the incident so that they could quickly locate any potential suspects, things of that nature, right? So the idea would be kind of like possibly something like what happened or an active shooter situation where they can quickly assist with protecting the students and the nearby community.
Mr. Rollins.
So this is just amending one paragraph, and it uses the phrase emergency situations, which is capitalized. I'm assuming that means that that phrase is defined somewhere in the main document, in the main agreement?
Yes, we've had discussions with the city surrounding the context of emergency situations.
And there's a definition somewhere else, because it's not defined here, but is it defined in the actual intergovernmental agreement?
Yes, there's some surrounding context for it, yes.
Do we need that?
Well, this entire change is based upon something called emergency situations, which I mean, from a contract standpoint, if you have capitalized letters like that, it means it's defined somewhere. I'm just asking where it's defined.
Yes, let me pull it. I'll pull it the entire Mr. Rollins, may I have permission to email you about that after
no, that's
the meeting?
fine.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think you should, all board members.
Okay.
Thank you. And is it not important to have that as part of that, I guess it's in the agreement, and so you don't have the whole agreement available for us here?
I prefer to email it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions about this amendment? Yes.
So is the request for the police to be able to have access to like students' videos, like things off social media, or is this more so just things that are captured by like our surveillance cameras?
Correct. That would be items captured by the district's surveillance videos.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So any additional video that we might have from a student's phone or the like would not be part of this, is that correct? That's what you're asking?
Yeah, that was part of the question too.
Typically, if the district comes into possession of a student's own personal video, it's in the context of some student disciplinary matter, and in that context, it is a student record. So the police department would need to subpoena or get a court order for individual student records. There's a statute that governs the district's obtaining of students' personal social media accounts, et cetera, and it indicates that the district cannot force students to hand over passwords or anything of that nature. We can ask that they participate. So if there's something that they typically have on their phone, like a video, and it's in their Instagram account or something, they can offer it to the district to assist in an investigation, or sometimes they bring it forward to assist.
But the question is if they bring it forward and we have it, then is that also available to the police department?
If they bring it forward and we have it, it is not available to the police department pursuant to that IGA, because that IGA governs the district's surveillance videos.
Okay, that's helpful. All right. This returns for a vote at the February 8th meeting next Tuesday. So if you have any additional questions, I think that legal would be a great place to send them. Our consent agenda items for governance are for that same meeting on February 8th include the minutes, contract purchase orders, workers' compensation settlement, freedom of information log. And for the 22nd meeting would include the meeting minutes, contract purchase orders, the 22-23 academic calendar, workers' compensation settlement, and freedom of information log. We have no speakers. So, but before we adjourn, I do want to, and I will ask if there's any further comments or agenda recommendations by the board. I would like to make one correction from the start of the meeting where we looked at the minutes from January 4th of 22, and Ms. Muhammad has mentioned that there is a correction that needs being put in place there. For some reason, it has her being absent, and she was present, so that will be taken care of unless I see any issues with that. Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Same sign. Okay, thank you. We'll see you next Tuesday. Good night. Hey, if that TV lady is out there, I would